all and welcome. My name is Margaret. This is Costume and Conservation. On this channel we talk about what the title states, costume and conservation. I'm a textile conservator in training and also a historical costumer, so I welcome you to this video. This is sort of a sequel to when I rated all of the versions of Pride and Prejudice, which is going to be up here and down here if you would like to see that or haven't already seen it. In that video we went over 20 renditions, adaptations if you will, of the classic Jane Austen novel Pride and Prejudice that have been adapted for film and television. So I thought we'd keep on rolling with the Jane Austen adaptations and do every version of Emma that has been put to film. So today we have quite a few less adaptations. We only have 9 instead of like 23. There was a lot of Pride and Prejudice adaptations. So I guess we can just jump right into it. I should say Emma is not a Jane Austen novel that I was as familiar with. Pride and Prejudice is my favorite. I have read Emma, and it was a while ago, but I have read it. And I was really inspired by the new 2020 version that came out. I really loved that movie, and I thought, hey, we should deep dive into Emma. There are quite a few adaptations of that. So without further ado, let's look at our categories. In the top spot, it's...
If I loved you less, then I might be able to talk about it more.
You know, movies that I still thought were quite good are Handsome, Clever, and Rich. Movies that I thought, you know, were good, but probably wouldn't watch again, A Pianoforte with No Return Address.
Well, that was thoughtful of whoever sent the instrument.
Movies that were kind of just boring, but there's nothing truly bad about them. Hearing a Letter from Jane Fairfax 30 times over.
News. We've had a letter this very morning from my niece, Jane Fairfax.
And of course,
As if.
just added as a disclaimer, if you have differing opinions to mine, that is completely fine. And you can tell me in the comments. Just, you know, be nice about it. They're just movies. I'm not a person who really cares that much if a movie is super close to the book, because I think that they both serve different functions, and if you want to have the book on film, just read the book. But whatever your opinion is, I would love to hear it down below. What's your favorite version of Emma? What would you like me to watch next? I'm thinking that I should do every version of every Jane Austen that has been put to film and television. I will say one more thing before we get started. There are some other versions of Emma, namely from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, that are not on this list because they no longer exist. But just know there were some earlier adaptations of this novel. Unfortunately, they have been lost to time. Without further ado, let's talk film adaptations of Emma. Off the bat, we have the 2009 version of Emma. This I am going to put into the A category, and here's why. So I do like this version. This is a mini-series. I believe it is 4 episodes? So 3 or 4 episodes. I've seen it quite a few times. This adaptation stars Romola Gardy as well as Johnny Lee Miller. Johnny Lee Miller, of course, returning to the Austen stage 10 years after he did Mansfield Park. I'm putting this in the Handsome, Clever, and Rich category for a couple of reasons. I do enjoy this. It's one of the only series on this list, and by far the best series on this list. They give Emma like a weird wanderlust situation. Normally she's pretty okay just being in Highbury, but in this adaptation she really wants to get out and see the world, particularly the sea, and it's something that's very unique to this version.
Oh, the seaside.
And that's why it kind of loses the top spot for me. I don't know. It just doesn't have that spark that I really want to see, but I did enjoy watching it. It's cute, it's fun, it's Emma. So next is, of course, Emma Approved. This is a web series that was put out by Pemberley Digital. It is still up online, and it was an interactive web series at the time. So this is also going into Handsome, Clever, and Rich. Emma Approved, if you're not aware, is sort of a sequel series to the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which were produced by Hank Green. If you know that name, very famous YouTuber. I really liked Lizzie Bennet Diaries, and I think I liked Emma Approved better, to be honest, because it was a little shorter, a little bit snappier. But the only reason it's missing the top spot is because I felt it was better when you were watching along with it, because there was this interactive element. The characters had Twitter accounts. I'm not sure if they had Instagram accounts, but There was an interactive element to it, which is missing upon playback. I still really enjoyed it, but that's why it is not missing the top spot. I do highly recommend this. There is another web series, if you look up list of Emma adaptations on Wikipedia, where Emma is actually LGBTQ. And I will say, I did not watch this for the series because that was not a professionally produced web series, but I will still put it down below in the links in case you want to check it out. Next, we have the 1972 version of Emma. This is a 6-part miniseries, and it was boring as hell, and that's why it's going into A Letter from Jane Fairfax, read 30 times over. If you want a word-for-word Emma adaptation, this is the project for you. If you want to be bored for like 5 hours, this is also the adaptation for you. You can just tell with BBC television from this era, there wasn't a ton of budget. So you sort of get the same, like, 4 sets. The costumes are very samey. The costumes in this one are actually interesting, mostly because it looks like Laura Ashley with a doily stuck on top of their head. But there are some pieces that I could swear are most likely original Regency pieces, which is something that was done quite often in the mid-20th century, using original extant garments as costumes for film and television. So there is some interest in that sense of this sort of historiography of adaptations of Jane Austen, which is very meta to think about. But all in all, this version was, its biggest crime was being boring as hell. If this is your favorite, I totally understand, because it was probably your first adaptation of Emma, and also it is super close to the book. Like, super close to the book. Next we have, the 1996 or 1995, sometimes they get mixed up, but it's the 1996 version of Emma starring Kate Beckinsale. This is going in Handsome, Clever, and Rich. I really liked this version, okay? This is from the same producers that brought you Pride and Prejudice 1995, and you can tell it has that same sort of aesthetic and air to it that the 1995 version of Pride and Prejudice has. However, it goes at a fast clip. This should have been a series. If it was a series, this would have been in the top spot. I absolutely love the chemistry between Kate Beckinsale and Mark Strong, who plays Mr. Knightley. I was like, who is that? I can't place him. And it was Mark Strong with hair. It's like when you watch the 1970s version of North and South, you're like, who is that? And you're like, oh, it's just Patrick Stewart with hair. Really, really enjoyed it. They did do some like wacky stuff at the end where they had like a banquet, which did not exist in the original source material, but I loved it. It was like a little fan servicey, but like in the best way. Definitely in the A category. Would have liked to see more, and that's why it's not in the top spot, but I would highly recommend this version. I think this version gets passed up a lot because it's outshined by another version on this list, which we will be talking about shortly. But let's move on to something completely different. So let's talk Clueless 1995. So this might be a controversial opinion, but this is going in the top spot. If I loved it less, I could talk about it more. Clueless 1995 is by far the best sort of teen classic literature adaptation of the 90s. They did a lot of them. I also love 10 Things I Hate About You, which is Taming of the Shrew. But they did Cruel Intentions, which is a weird pick for classic literature to be set in a high school. But I think Clueless does a really good job of adapting the source material to a completely different time and place. It's fun, it's fresh. Like Bridget Jones, as we discussed in the Pride and Prejudice video, there are some outdated dialogue and character tropes in here, but they don't bother me as much as they did in Bridget Jones for some reason. I also love the fashion in this movie. It's fabulous. Cher's costumes are great. Dion's costumes are great. It's funny, it's lighthearted. Paul Rudd is in it, which is a plus. I think Paul Rudd is fabulous whenever he's in a film. And so I would highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. If you're like one of the 2 people who hasn't seen it. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, just putting that out there right now. But for me, it takes the top tier category. All right, let's talk about Aisha. Aisha is a Hindi language movie from 2010, and it is an adaptation of Emma. Now, I'm going to put this in a pianoforte with no return address, and here is why. This movie does not come with English subtitles at all. Amazon told me that it did, so I paid $4 and watched an entire movie in the Hindi language. I do not speak Hindi, okay? So the reason I am putting this in the dead center is because I think I only got about half of what was going on, partially because I don't speak the language, which is totally my thing. If you do speak Hindi and you have seen this movie, please tell me what you thought about it in the comments, and if I missed anything from understanding only about 10% of the dialogue, because there is some random English thrown in there. I do love a Bollywood film every once in a while. Bride and Prejudice, the sort of English language Bollywood film in the Pride and Prejudice series, I do enjoy. I think I also put it dead center as well. But I can't really pass judgment on this film so much because of the whole language thing. But it is pretty cheesy. There is a really fun dance number at the end. And all in all, I think that if you speak the language and you're interested in watching it, you should watch it, because it does bring some interesting new perspectives to Emma, some new cultural perspectives to Emma, but it's also a cheesy movie. So if that's your thing, I would check it out. I don't really have a ton to say on it because, again, I don't speak Hindi. So let's move on to Emma, the movie from 1996, also starring Gwyneth Paltrow. We're putting this in a pianoforte with no return address. Here's why. So this movie is in the vein of Sense and Sensibility, directed by Ang Lee, in the fact that it's a highly polished Hollywood film with very recognizable actors and actresses. Now, I'm putting this lower than the Kate Beckinsale version because even though it's a fine film, it hits all the marks. There's just something robotic and sort of lifeless about it, in my personal opinion. I'm not a super big fan of Gwyneth Paltrow, so that might have to do with it. But it just sort of doesn't capture that wonderful, familial, sort of friendly air that a lot of Jane Austen adaptations do. But it's also not over the top and, like, ridiculous like some of these versions of Emma are. I tend to love movies that are either very feel-good or very ridiculous, and this doesn't hit either. It does fall into one of my favorite Jane Austen tropes, though, which is archery for no reason. I don't think Jane Austen ever wrote an archery scene, but it is one of those activities that you see a lot of prints of in the Regency era, so I feel like directors and creative people like to put in archery scenes in Jane Austen when it's like, guys, you don't necessarily need to do that, but it does have a unexpected archery scene, just like the 1940s version of Pride and Prejudice does. And therefore it goes in a pianoforte with no return address. I'm sure y'all will have differing opinions, or maybe you'll agree with me. All right, we're gonna save Emma 2020 for last, but this is Emma the Modern Musical. No, it's just called Emma the Musical. And this was put out in 2018. This also goes in a pianoforte with no return address category. Here's why. It was pretty boring on screen. However, if my nice aunt said, hey, I got tickets to Emma the Musical, I'm going to take you out to lunch and take you to a matinee of this performance, I would go and I'd have a great time, okay? I feel like these sort of filmed stage adaptations miss a lot on rewatching. Also, what I found kind of odd was this was set in the 1960s, but they used the original dialogue, which doesn't quite match up all of the time. I think they set it in the 1960s purely from a costuming and set design perspective, so they didn't have to actually spend a ton of money trying to figure out Regency sets, which is totally fine, but it did feel a little bit off-kilter at some points. And the music was forgettable. I don't remember literally any of it. It wasn't bad, it's just forgettable. Of course, our beauty, Emma 2020, she takes the top spot. I love this film. I think it really brings something to an adaptation for film. It has wonderful aesthetic, wonderful visuals, wonderful music.
I like to rise when the sun she rises early in the morning.
It has this sort of folky music in it that, you know, it feels very Regency, it feels very period, but it's not like chamber music, which you get a lot, which it gets kind of old. This is very new, very fresh. The costumes are gorgeous. People have waxed poetic about these costumes on Costume before. I'll link some videos down below about that if you really want to deep dive into that. But if you are a historical dress fan, the costumes in this are swoon-worthy. They are gorgeous, and I cannot honestly say more about it that other people haven't said. I love Anya Taylor-Joy as Emma. I think she does a great job. I love all the other actors. Bill Nighy in this is very funny as Mr. Woodhouse. And honestly, it's not a perfect adaptation of the movie, of the book, I should say. But I think it does a fantastic job, and it's by far my favorite period adaptation of Emma. So that's our list! What did you think? Did you think I got things right? Did you think I got things wrong? Tell me down below in the comments. Just don't tell me that I am not a Jane Austen fan, because I am. I just have odd taste, to be honest with you. Also tell me down below in the comments if you would like to see more of these ranking videos of adaptations. We don't always do this on this channel, but it is fun. I love watching period dramas when I sew, and so it's very fun to discuss them with all of you. Otherwise, on this channel, we talk about costume and conservation. So I often do sewing videos and videos talking about dress history topics, as well as some very exciting upcoming videos about art conservation and textile conservation, of which I am getting my master's degree in. So if any of that sounds good to you, please subscribe down below to be notified when I put out more videos. I would love to see you back here, but in the meantime, have a lovely day. Bye!